The ship landed softly on the alien planet. Marcus stood at the edge of the landing platform, looking out over the unfamiliar landscape. The sky was a deep purple, and the air smelled faintly of flowers and spices. He adjusted his uniform and checked the message on his communicator one last time. He was here to represent Earth, to start a conversation with a new alien species, and hopefully bring about peace. The mission was important, and every move counted. As the doors of the ship opened, a small group of aliens stepped out to greet him. Their skin shimmered with hues of blue and green, and their eyes glowed softly in the dim light. At the front of the group was Princess Leora, the royal daughter of the alien species that controlled this planet. She was tall and graceful, but Marcus could see the nervous tension in her posture. Princess Leora had been raised with stories about human stories full of fear and misunderstanding. Her people believed humans were savage and dangerous, especially in matters of relationships. There was a belief shared by many of her kind that humans ate their mates. It was an old myth, but one that had lingered in the minds of the alien species for generations. As Leora stepped forward, her gaze met Marcus's. He could see the fear in her eyes. She had been briefed on the human delegation, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight of a human face-to-face. The stories she had heard about Earth were far from comforting. "Welcome, Princess Leora," Marcus said, offering a polite bow. He had been trained in diplomacy, and he knew how important it was to make a good first impression. Leora took a step back, clearly startled by his gesture. Her eyes widened as she glanced nervously at her guards. She had heard about humans, of course, but seeing one up close was different. Her mind raced with the tales she had been told. Humans eat their mates, she thought. She had always dismissed it as a myth, but now, standing so close to Marcus, the fear she had kept buried deep inside her rose to the surface. Marcus noticed the princess's discomfort and immediately regretted not having more time to prepare for this moment. He had been trained to talk to aliens, but he hadn't been told what to do if they were scared of him. He shifted uncomfortably, trying to think of something to say that would calm her down. "I assure you, Princess, we come in." "Peace," Marcus said, trying to speak slowly and clearly. He had learned that communication was key in situations like this. "Humans are not what you've been told. We do not eat our mates. We are here to make friends, to build understanding." But Leora did not seem reassured. She took another step back, her body language stiff with fear. The alien guards behind her tensed, ready to act at the slightest sign of aggression. You do not eat your mates?" Leora asked, her voice shaky. The fear in her voice was evident. "Then, why are you here? What do you want from us?" Marcus struggled to find the right words. He knew the truth. Humans had never eaten their mates, but how could he convince her of that in this first meeting? "We are not here to take anything from you," he said gently. "We are here to talk. We want to build trust. We want to know each other. Come. In peace." Leora's eyes searched his face, trying to find any sign that he was lying. But all she saw was sincerity. Her mind was still clouded by the teachings of her people, the belief that humans were dangerous, that they could not be trusted. Yet, Marcus seemed different from the savage creatures she had been warned about. The princess looked to one of her guards for reassurance. The guard gave a small curt nod, but his eyes remained wary. "Will you promise not to hurt us, Leora?" asked her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, his expression earnest. "I promise. We have no intention of harming anyone here." Despite his calm demeanor, Leora could not shake the fear that gripped her. The stories of her people had painted humans as terrifying, and she had always believed them. But now, in the presence of this human diplomat, she wasn't sure what to believe. She had been taught that humans were a threat, yet Marcus's words were soft, his body language open. She glanced around at the alien guards, wondering if they were just as uncertain. The tension in the air was thick, and the silence stretched. On it felt as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "Please," Marcus continued, his voice low and reassuring. "Give us a chance to prove that we are not the monsters you've been told we are." Leora hesitated, her mind racing. She had been taught to fear humans her entire life, but here, in front of her, was a human who seemed different. She had to decide whether to trust him or continue to let fear control her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Leora spoke again, her voice quieter now, but still full of caution. "I will try," she said softly. "But no. If you betray our trust, we will not hesitate to fight." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "We'll do everything we can to prove you're wrong about us." And so, the first steps toward a fragile understanding began. The journey would be long, filled with challenges and misunderstandings. But for now, both sides were willing to try, to trust, and to see what could come from this unexpected encounter. The days passed slowly after the first meeting between Marcus and Princess Leora. Despite the human diplomat's calm words, Leora's fears did not fade. She spent most of her time alone in her room, away from the humans. The stories she had been told about them echoed in her mind. She couldn't understand why they wanted peace or why they were willing to come here. In her home, humans were always portrayed as monstrous creatures who used violence to get what they wanted. The very idea that humans could live peacefully with others seemed impossible. Leora had never met a human before, but she had always been taught to avoid them. They were dangerous and unpredictable, and her people had long feared them. Marcus had promised he meant no harm, but Leora couldn't shake the feeling of unease that followed her. She had heard tales of humans, but never had she imagined one would be standing in front of her, offering friendship. Her heart still raced whenever she saw him or heard his voice. One afternoon, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep orange, Leora walked outside to get some air. She stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out over the alien landscape. The horizon stretched far, filled with towering trees and strange glowing flowers. Her thoughts drifted back to her home on the alien planet, to her family, to her people. She had always been taught to view humans as a threat, but now that she was here, she didn't know what to think. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She turned quickly, startled. It was Marcus. "Princess Leora," he said with a gentle voice. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. May I come in?" Leora hesitated for a moment before nodding. She didn't want to be rude, but her fear was still present. She stepped back, allowing him to enter. "Is everything all right?" Marcus asked, his eyes scanning the room. He seemed genuinely concerned. Leora nodded slowly. "Yes, I am fine," she replied. Though her voice was not as steady as she had hoped, there was a pause as Marcus waited for her to say more. Finally, he spoke again. "You don't have to be afraid. I know I may seem strange to you, but I want you to know that we are not here to harm you or your people." Leora didn't respond right away. She had heard those words before, but they still didn't fully ease her anxiety. She crossed her arms and looked out the window, her back to him. The room felt too small with him standing so close. "I don't understand," she said quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. "How can I trust you? How can I believe that humans are not the monsters I've been told about?" Marcus sighed and took a step closer. "I understand that it's difficult," he said. "But sometimes the things we are taught are not the whole truth. We have our flaws, just like every species, but we've learned to work together, too. Build something better." Leora turned to face him, her brow furrowed. "But the stories, the things I've heard, about humans taking what they want without thinking of the consequences, about humans eating their mates." She looked away, feeling ashamed to voice the fear that had been with her since childhood. Marcus froze, shocked by her words. He had heard of this myth before, but he had never truly understood its impact until now. "That is not true," he said firmly. "What? We do not eat our mates. We value life, all life, and we protect those we care about. I can promise you that." Laura's eyes met his, searching for any sign that he might be lying. She had always been taught that humans were cruel, but the sincerity in his voice made her wonder if there was more to the story than she had been told. Could it be that humans were not the monsters she had feared? "Why would you want to help us?" Leora asked, still uncertain. "Why come here, to a planet you don't know, To people you've never met. Marcus smiled softly, because we believe that every species has something valuable to offer. We believe in peace and learning from one another. The more we understand each other, the less there is to fear. Leora's heart softened at his words, but her doubts remained. She had spent her whole life learning to fear humans, and now she was being asked to trust one. She had been taught that humans were violent and dangerous, and those teachings were hard to shake. For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence. Finally, Leora spoke again, her voice quieter than before. I don't know if I can forget everything I've been taught, she admitted. But maybe I can start too. Listen, to learn, I'll try. But you must understand, it will take time. Marcus nodded, his expression understanding. I will be patient. We have all the time we need. You are not alone here. For the first time since their meeting, Leora felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps Marcus was right. Perhaps humans weren't the monsters she had been told about. She couldn't trust him completely yet, but maybe, just maybe, she could start to understand them. As the evening turned to night, Leora found herself reflecting on the conversation. Her fear was still there, but it was no longer the only thing. She felt curiosity and uncertainty began to replace the fear, and for the first time, she wondered if the stories about humans were wrong. And in the distance, the stars twinkled brightly above, as if promising that the future could be different if only she was willing to take the first step. Days passed, and the uneasy silence between Leora and Marcus started to fade, though the tension remained. Leora still didn't trust him fully, but there was something different in the way she looked at him now. Her fear, though present, was no longer the only emotion she felt. There was curiosity, too, and Marcus could see that Marcus had been thinking about how to bridge the gap between them. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He couldn't just tell her not to fear. He had to show her. He needed to break down the walls she had built around herself. Walls made of old myths and fears, stories of humans, of their supposed cruelty, were deeply ingrained in her mind. And to change that, he would need to be patient. One morning, Marcus came to Leora's quarters with an idea. He had heard that the aliens here, like many species, had a deep connection with nature. Their culture was shaped by their land, their environment, and the creatures that lived alongside them. Marcus decided to use that to his advantage. Leora was sitting by a large window, gazing out at the strange landscape of the planet. The trees, stretched high into the sky, their branches heavy with thick, glowing fruit. There were sounds of unknown creatures in the distance. She didn't turn as Marcus entered, but he could feel her attention shift toward him. Princess Leora, Marcus greeted her with a gentle smile. I have an idea. She didn't answer at first, but her eyes softened. An idea? Yes, Marcus said. I thought it might help you understand more about humans and the way we live. Would you be willing to come with me? Leora looked at him, then back at the window. She could feel the warmth of the sun on her skin, and for a brief moment, the idea of stepping outside, away from the palace, felt freeing. She had been inside for too long, and the thought of fresh air, of seeing more of the world outside, was tempting. I will come, she said after a moment, surprising herself with her own willingness. She stood up, her long robes flowing around her as she walked toward the door. Marcus led her to a nearby grove on the palace grounds. The trees here were different from the ones she had seen from her window. They were tall and thick, their bark a rich purple color, and their leaves shimmered as if they were made of silver. She had never been to this part of the grounds before. What is this place? Laura asked, her voice filled with wonder. It's a sacred grove, Marcus explained. Humans have places like this, two places where we feel at peace, where we can think and reflect. We call them gardens or sanctuaries. Leora stepped closer to one of the trees, running her fingers gently along its smooth bark. It's beautiful, she whispered. She had never thought that humans would have such a deep appreciation for nature. All she had ever heard about them was that they were violent, that they fought for control. She had never heard of them creating such peaceful places. There's something I'd like to show you, Marcus said, leading her further into the grove. Follow me." As they walked, Marcus continued to talk about Earth and the ways humans connected with nature. He explained how humans planted trees, cared for animals, and worked to protect their environment. The more he spoke, the more Leora began to realize how much she didn't know about humans. She had always assumed they only cared about themselves, that they never stopped to appreciate the world around them. But now, Marcus was telling her something different. They stopped by a small pond at the center of the grove. The water was crystal clear, and the light from the sun reflected off its surface, making the entire scene look like something out of a dream. "Humans have a deep respect for life," Marcus continued. "We believe that all life has value. We protect the creatures that live alongside us, and we work to make sure future generations can enjoy the same beauty we have." Leora bent down to look at the water, watching the tiny fish swim beneath the surface. She felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. It was hard to describe, but the peacefulness of the place made her feel less afraid. Maybe Marcus was telling the truth. Maybe humans weren't the monsters she had been taught to fear. Marcus watched her for a moment, sensing her growing openness. He took a step closer, careful not to invade her space. "I know you've heard stories about us, Princess," he said softly, "but stories are often told from one perspective. They don't always show the whole truth. My people like yours have made mistakes. We've fought wars. We've hurt others. But we've also learned. We've learned how to care for each other, how to make peace, how to protect those we love." Leora turned to face him, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, she didn't see a stranger standing before her. She saw a human who was trying to help, trying to show her the truth. She saw someone who cared. "I don't know if I can forget the stories," Leora admitted quietly, "but I'm starting to believe that not all of them are true." Marcus smiled warmly. "That's all I can ask for. Understanding takes time, but we'll get there, together." The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the grove. The air was cool now, but there was a peaceful stillness to everything. Leora stood quietly for a moment, taking it all in. The world around her felt different, less hostile. Maybe it was because of the peaceful place they were standing in, or maybe it was because she was starting to see the human side of Marcus, the side that cared, that valued peace, for the first time. Leora wondered what it would be like to live in a world where fear didn't control her every move. Perhaps humans weren't as bad as she had been told. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance for understanding. As they walked back toward the palace, Leora felt something change within herself. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt that she could face it with an open heart as the days passed. Princess Leora and Marcus spent more time together, and something shifted between them. Leora, though still cautious, began to feel a connection to the human diplomat. The fear that had once gripped her heart slowly started to fade, replaced by curiosity and, to her surprise, a growing sense of trust. She didn't fully understand why, but there was something about Marcus that made her feel safe, something different from the stories she had heard all her life. Marcus, on the other hand, continued to show patience. He didn't rush Leora, didn't push her to trust him faster than she was ready. He had seen how deep the misunderstandings between their two species ran, and he knew that time would be the key to breaking through. He continued to explain human culture to her, answering her questions as best as he could. Every day, she seemed to ask more questions about humans' values, their beliefs, and their way of life. One afternoon, Marcus invited Leora to a human-style dinner. It wasn't much, just a simple meal of vegetables, bread, and a drink, but it was something from his own world. He hoped it would show her that humans didn't live by the myths she had been told about. Leora was hesitant at first. She wasn't sure what to expect, and the idea of eating with a human still felt strange to her. But Marcus was kind, and she had come to trust him. So she agreed to join him. The room they sat in was simple, yet comfortable. The food was laid out before them on a small wooden table. The warm glow of the setting sun filtered through the windows. Casting a peaceful light over the scene, Leora sat across from Marcus, still uncertain, but willing to try. He smiled at her as she took a careful bite of the food. "Is it to your liking?" he asked, watching her closely. Leora paused for a moment, considering the taste.
It was different from what she was used to, but not bad. It's good, she
Said quietly, giving him a small smile in return. Marcus felt a sense of relief at her response. He had hoped she would be willing to try and see that the human way of life wasn't as strange as she had believed. I've been thinking about what you said, Leora continued, her voice soft but steady. About humans caring for the world around them. I never understood that. My people. We've always been taught that humans are focused only on themselves. But maybe I was wrong. Marcus looked at her with genuine interest. It's okay to be wrong sometimes, he said. It's how we learn. We all start with what we know. But as we experience more, we see that there's a bigger picture. Humans value connection, Leora. We value life in all its forms, whether it's a plant, an animal, or another person. Leora thought about that for a moment, taking in his words. I don't think I've ever thought of humans in that way. I've always seen you as different, but now I'm starting to see that maybe our differences don't mean we can't understand each other. Marcus nodded. We are different, yes. But that doesn't mean we can't learn from one another. It just means we need to be open. We need to be willing to listen. The more Leora listened to Marcus, the more she found herself opening up to him. She had spent so much of her life fearing what she didn't understand. But now, with Marcus by her side, she was starting to question those fears. Maybe they weren't all true. Maybe humans weren't the monsters she had been taught to avoid. As the evening went on, the conversation continued easy and natural. They talked about their cultures, their beliefs, their worlds, Leora learned. More about Earth than she ever thought possible, and Marcus learned about the alien world in turn. They shared stories of their childhoods, their dreams, and their hopes for the future. The meal was over before either of them realized it, and yet neither of them wanted to leave the table. The connection they had begun to build was something neither of them had expected. But it was real. Thank you, Marcus, Leora said quietly, looking him in the eye. I never thought I would feel so comfortable here with you. I didn't think it was possible? Marcus smiled warmly. It's my pleasure, Leora. I'm glad you gave it a chance. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation sinking in. Leora's heart felt lighter than it had in days. She realized now that the fear that had once controlled her was slowly being replaced by something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for a future where humans and aliens could live side by side. Not as enemies, but as partners. Hope that, despite all the differences, they could find common ground. Later that evening, as Leora lay in her quarters, she thought about the day's events. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She had spent so much of her life fearing humans, and yet here she was, sitting beside one and feeling a sense of peace she had never expected. The stories she had been told were not entirely true. Yes, humans had made mistakes, just like any species. But that didn't mean they couldn't change, couldn't learn, couldn't build something better. Leora had seen that today, and Marcus seen the kindness in his eyes and the sincerity in his words as she drifted off to sleep. Leora couldn't help but wonder what the future held. The fear was still there. But now, it was accompanied by something new: curiosity. And she had a feeling that, with Marcus's help, she would be able to see the world in a way she had never imagined. The peaceful days Leora and Marcus had been spending together seemed to be coming to an end. Tension had begun to rise again. Not between them, but from outside the palace walls. Rumors had spread that there were factions within Leora's people who opposed her growing relationship with humans. These factions were concerned about the changes Leora might bring, changes they believed would weaken their race and traditions. Leora could feel the pressure mounting on her. Marcus knew that the calm they had found could easily be shattered by forces beyond their control. There were still many on her home planet who believed the old myths about humans, and they would do anything to keep those myths alive. One evening, Marcus was called to a meeting with Leora in the royal chamber. The room, once filled with warmth and hope, now seemed heavy with the weight of uncertainty. The quiet that had settled between them in recent days was now replaced by a sense of unease. Leora stood by the window, her back to Marcus. The night sky stretched out before her, dark and vast. She had always found comfort in the stars, but tonight they seemed distant, as if they were watching her struggle. "Marcus," she began softly, her voice trembling slightly, "I've heard whispers. There are those who believe we should not trust humans, they think. They think I am weakening our people by speaking to you." Marcus stepped forward, his expression serious. "Leora, you've been honest with me. You've tried to open your people's minds to the truth. But some things take time. Not everyone is ready for that change." She turned to face him, her face full of worry. "But what if they never understand? What if they do something to stop us?" Marcus looked into her eyes, trying to reassure. "Her, we can't control what others do, but we can control how we react. The path we've chosen is difficult, but it's the right one. We're not fighting for ourselves, Leora. We're fighting for the future." Leora nodded slowly, taking comfort in his words, but her mind was still clouded with doubt. She had spent so much of her life fearing humans, and now that she was starting to understand them, she didn't want to lose the chance at peace. But deep down, she knew that not everyone on her planet would accept this peace so easily. Suddenly, the door to the chamber burst open, and one of the palace guards rushed in, his face pale with panic. "Your Highness," the guard said, bowing. "Quickly, there's been an attack. The rebels. They've come to the palace." Leora's heart dropped into her stomach. She had feared this moment for so long. "What do they want?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the fear building. "Inside her, they demand your immediate removal from power," the guard replied. "They say your alliance with the humans is a betrayal. They will stop at nothing to see that it ends." Marcus's eyes narrowed, a sense of determination settling over him. "And we will stop them." Leora glanced at him, her fear still present, but now mixed with a new resolve. "We have to protect what we've started, Marcus. I can't let them tear this apart." The two of them quickly made their way out of the chamber and down the long, winding halls of the palace. The sound of footsteps echoed in the quiet corridors as they moved quickly. Their thoughts focused on the task ahead. The palace had already been put on alert, and guards were stationed at every entrance. The rebels were ruthless, and they had a large force at their command. Leora knew the coming battle would not be easy. As they reached the main hall, they saw the first signs of the rebellion, alien soldiers with weapons drawn, shouting as they stormed the palace. Leora's heart pounded in her chest, but Marcus stood firm by her side. He had fought in battles before, but this time was different. This time he was fighting for something more than just survival. "Leora, stay behind me," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We'll get through this together." She nodded, not wanting to leave his side. For the first time since arriving on this planet, Leora understood what it meant to protect something worth fighting for. She had spent so long fearing humans, but now she saw them as partners, allies who would stand with her when the time came. The battle raged on, fierce and chaotic. Marcus fought alongside the palace guards, pushing back the rebels who threatened to destroy everything they had worked for. Leora stood back, watching the fight unfold, her heart heavy with the weight of the conflict. She had never imagined that her desire for peace would lead to such violence. Hours passed before the last of the rebels were finally driven out. The palace was secure, but the damage had been done. Leora stood in the aftermath, her body shaking with exhaustion and fear. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus, covered in dust and sweat, nodded. "For now, but we need to stay vigilant. There will be others who will try to stop us." Leora looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Marcus smiled, though his expression was weary. "We're in this together, Leora. We always will be." Battle had ended, but the war was far from over. The future of their people and of their alliance still hung in the balance. Leora knew there would be more challenges ahead, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them. With Marcus by her side, she knew they could overcome anything. And as the first light of dawn broke through the palace windows, Leora made a promise to herself and to the people she had yet to reach. She would continue to fight for peace. No matter the cost, the rebellion had been fierce, But it wasn't over. Leora and Marcus knew that there would be more battles ahead. After the initial attack on the palace, the rebels scattered, but their plans were not finished. The anger against the growing alliance between humans and Leora's people still burned deep in the hearts of many. Leora stood by the window of the royal chamber, looking out at the vast landscape below. The sky was clear, and the air felt calm, but inside, her mind raced with worry. She had always believed that peace was possible, that trust could be built. But now, she wasn't so sure. Every step forward seemed to come with a price. Marcus entered the room quietly, his footsteps barely making a sound. He had been through many battles in his time, but he could see how much this situation was weighing on Leora. He knew she wasn't just a princess. In this moment, she was a leader, someone carrying the future of her people on her shoulders. "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked softly, walking up to stand beside her. Leora didn't answer at first. She simply stared out at the horizon, lost in her thoughts. "I never imagined it would come to this," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I wanted peace, Marcus. I thought I could make them see, but now I'm not sure." Marcus placed a hand gently on her shoulder, offering what comfort he could. "Peace takes time, Leora. It's not always easy, and it's never without challenges." Ease time, Leora. It's not always easy, and it's never without challenges. But I believe in you. I believe in what we're trying to do." Leora turned to him, her expression weary but grateful. "But what if they never change? What if the rebellion only grows stronger from here?" Marcus shook his head. "Then we'll be ready. We won't stop fighting for what's right, and neither should you. Your people need you now more than ever." Leora nodded slowly, but her mind was still clouded with doubt. She had seen what the rebels were capable of. They were willing to destroy everything for their cause. The thought of losing everything she had worked for was terrifying. But Marcus's words, his faith in her, gave her the strength she needed to keep going. Later that day, the situation worsened. The rebellion had regrouped, and this time, they were targeting the royal family. Directly, a new threat emerged. A powerful faction led by a rogue commander who had once been a trusted ally of the royal family. Now he had turned against them. Driven by his hatred for humans and the changes they had brought to the planet, the commander, whose name was Varric, was known for his brutal tactics. I'd built a small but deadly army, and he was coming for the palace. The time for diplomacy was over. It was clear that Leora and Marcus would have to fight to protect everything they held dear. Marcus and Leora gathered the palace guards and the remaining loyal forces. The air was thick with tension as soldiers prepared for the coming battle. The palace walls, once symbols of safety and peace, were now the front lines of a war. Leora stood at the front of the group, her eyes scanning the horizon. She was no longer the frightened princess who had first arrived on this planet. She was a leader, ready to defend her people and her beliefs. She had learned so much in the short time she had spent with Marcus, and she was determined to prove that her trust in humans was not misplaced. As the rebels drew closer, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. The sound of marching feet echoed through the palace grounds. Varroc's army was almost at the gates. Marcus stood beside Leora, his expression grim. "This is it," he said quietly. "We'll have to hold them off long enough for the reinforcements to arrive. We can't let them get inside." Leora nodded, her resolve hardening. "I won't let them destroy everything we've worked for. We fight for the future." The battle began as the first wave of rebels clashed with the palace guards. The air was filled with the sounds of shouting, the clash of weapons, and the rapid fire of blasters. Leora's heart raced as she fought alongside Marcus, her fear replaced by the adrenaline of battle. The fight was brutal, but Leora had never felt more alive. She could see the loyalty in the eyes of her people, the determination to protect what was theirs. Marcus fought by her side, guiding her with his experience and skill. Together, they worked as a team, pushing back the rebels and making sure no one was left behind. Leora could see Varric in the distance, his figure standing tall above the chaos. He was a ruthless commander, and he was coming for her. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had spent too much time fearing the unknown. Now she would stand tall and face her fears head dash on, as Varric's forces broke through the last line of defense. Leora and Marcus met the rogue commander on the battlefield, and the two of them faced off, their eyes locked in a moment of pure determination. "You're too late, Varric," Leora called out, her voice strong despite the chaos around her. "You will not destroy what we've built," Varric sneered, his eyes filled with anger. "You've betrayed your people, Princess. You've allowed the humans to take control. This ends now." But Leora wasn't afraid. She had found her strength, and she wouldn't let him take it away. With a swift movement, she and Marcus charged at Varric, their weapons drawn. The battle for the future was far from over, but Leora knew that with Marcus by her side, they could face any challenge that came their way. The battle had been long and grueling. The sounds of conflict still echoed through the palace, but the tide had finally turned. Marcus and Leora stood together, looking at the aftermath of the fight. The rebels had been pushed back, but not without cost. The walls of the palace, once symbols of safety, now bore the marks of the battle. Some of the soldiers who had fought by their side lay injured, while others were tending to their wounds. But for all the damage, the battle was over. Rebellion had failed. Leora stood quietly, her eyes scanning the scene around her. Her heart was heavy with the weight of the lives lost and the destruction that had occurred. But there was something else there too, something she hadn't expected. Relief. The worst was behind them, and now she could finally breathe. Marcus stood beside her, his face hard from the exhaustion of battle. "We've won," he said, his voice low. "But the war isn't over." Leora nodded, her gaze still fixed on the distant horizon. "No, there will always be those who oppose what we're trying to do. But now I'm sure of one thing. We can't stop. We have to keep going. For the future of both our people." Marcus looked at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "That's the spirit," he said. "And I'll be with you every step of the way." The two of them had fought together on the front lines. And now, standing side by side, Leora felt something she hadn't felt before: hope. She had been so afraid of losing everything, of failing her people, but now she saw that there was a chance, a real chance for peace. Over the next few days, Leora worked hard to heal the wounds left by the battle. She visited the injured soldiers, offering what comfort she could, and began to plan for the future. The rebellion might have been defeated for now, but Leora knew that it wasn't the end of the struggle. There were still many who believed in the old ways, many who would fight against her and against the idea of peace between humans and her people. But Leora was no longer afraid of those who opposed her. She had found strength in herself, in Marcus, and in the people who stood with her. She would not let that strength be broken by fear or doubt. One evening, after a long day of planning and organizing, Leora found herself standing outside the palace, looking up at the stars. The night was quiet, and the cool breeze brushed against her skin. For a moment, she allowed herself to just breathe, to feel the peace that had begun to settle over her. Marcus appeared beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "You're thinking about what comes next, aren't you?" Leora nodded, her eyes still fixed on the sky. "Yes, I've been so focused on getting through each day, on fighting for survival. But now, I'm starting to think about the future. What happens when the fighting stops? What kind of world do we want to build?" Marcus smiled, his voice gentle. "That's the question, isn't it? It's not just about surviving the war. It's about building something better. And I think, together, we can do that." Leora looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had never imagined that a human could be such a source of strength for her, that she could find this kind of bond with someone so different from herself. But Marcus had shown her that there was more to humans than the myths and the fears. He had shown her kindness, patience, and a willingness to fight for what was right. "I never thought I could trust you," Leora said, her voice soft. "But now I don't know what I would do without you." Marcus chuckled, the sound warm. "In comforting, you'd do just fine. You're stronger than you know, Leora." Leora smiled, the weight of her responsibilities feeling a little lighter. "I'm starting to believe that," she said. I've spent so much of my life thinking that I was just a princess, that I had to follow tradition and lead the way others expected me to. But now, I realize that I can choose my own path. And I want to build a future where both humans and my people can live together, side by side. Marcus nodded, his expression serious but hopeful. It won't be easy, but it'll be worth it, and I'll be right here with you. For the first time in a long while, Leora felt like she could see a future filled with hope. The war might have cost them dearly, but it had also brought them closer together. The bond between her people and humans had been tested, but it had survived. And now, she was ready to take the next step. "Thank you, Marcus," Leora said, her voice filled with sincerity. "For everything." Marcus smiled, his eyes reflecting the stars above. "We're in this together, Leora. Always." As the night stretched on, Leora felt the weight of her crown settle on her head. Not as a burden, but as a responsibility she was ready to bear. She had fought for her people, for the future of their planet, and now she would fight for peace not just between humans and her people, but for the peace that could unite them all. Together, Leora and Marcus stood side by side, watching the stars above, knowing that the road ahead would be difficult, but it was a road they would walk together.